I want to say to the public and the speakers, and this is not so much to the commission because you know this, our decision today is not based on whether the proposal for the ballpark and the real estate development is a good thing or a bad thing. It is not whether ballpark should be at Howard Terminal or at the Coliseum or anywhere else. It is what's within our jurisdiction and our mission, and that is whether Howard Terminal is needed for maritime uses or not. As the staff report focuses on and has indicated. That I would open discussion. I think Dave Brown had his hand up first.
Thank you, Chair Wasserman. So I know this is a Bay Area issue. It's an issue for all of BCDC. And having said that, I do want to mention that a portion of Howard Terminal is in my district. I happen to live at Jack London Square, which is adjacent to Howard Terminal. And it's something I've been tracking quite closely for some time now, even as Chief of Staff to the late Supervisor Wilma Chan. And I mention that because she was heavily involved in discussions early on about the ballpark, and she had two issues she was concerned with. And number one is adequate affordable housing, and that's an issue between the A's and the City of Oakland, and I think discussions are ongoing. The other issue was the viability of the port. And I think if she had been able to be here today and having read the staff recommendation, I think she would see what I see is that there is definitely the necessary information to move forward on this project. Cargo forecast shows there is adequate acreage available by 2050 to lift the port priority use area designation. We've learned that Howard Terminal has limited utility for container cargo. We do know that there are viable alternatives at the port for container and truck storage. We have learned that there is sufficient acreage for ro-ro cargo Bay Area wide. And it's clear that the issue of the turning basin is not a part of our discussion for today and left to the future. The experts have a clear consensus. The Port of Oakland, who are there to protect the viability of the port now and in the future, believe the port designation should be lifted. And BCDC staff, who are to protect the integrity of BCDC, the mission and its values, also believe that. And I, for that reason, do support the staff recommendation. And Chair Wasserman, I would be very interested in providing a motion at the necessary time. Thank you.
Thank you. I will recognize you at the appropriate time for that. Commissioner Butt.
Did he make a motion or not? Oh, okay.
I'm not asking for a motion yet.
I had two legal and procedural questions. The first one, there's been a lot of discussion about the turning basin. Would it be possible to adopt the resolution and leave the area plan for the turning basin, leave that within the port priority area so it would be preserved? Is that possible?
I would defer to Michael Ang on that.
Yes, Michael Ang, Senior Staff Attorney. Staff would not recommend a decision to amend the motion to retain the Port PUA designation solely for the Turning Basin project. I think we've discussed why a bit previously. One, it's not necessary for the Turning Basin project to be realized. And second, doing so doesn't really serve the policy basis for why PUA designations should be retained. Furthermore, the port has an option to exercise retention of the 10 acres for the Turning Basin project as a contractual matter with the athletics. So the retention is also not necessary to ensure that the port can pursue that project as it relates to the ballpark project. On the purpose, the cargo forecast essentially presumes that the Turning Basin project will occur. So in context of the basic policy considerations and the function of PUA designations under the McAteer-Petrus Act and under General Policy 4, retention of the PUA designation for the Turning Basin project, again, doesn't materially affect one way or the other the regional capability to meet projected growth in cargo or pressure for new bayfill. So it really just doesn't relate to the questions in front of the commission right now. From a permitting perspective, we do not have an active permit application for the Ballpark project or the Turning Basin project before us. So it's not appropriate. We don't believe that it's appropriate to be making determinations about the benefits or detriments of that project at this time through this process. How those projects work together, whether those projects should be allowed, balancing those interests, that will come at a later stage when permit applications are submitted for one or both of those projects. And we don't want to go into too much detail about how the commission may make a decision on either of those projects. But I suppose if it helps in the commission thinking about this, it's possible that as a condition of acting on the Ballpark project, that there could be a requirement for the Turning Basin project. And as mentioned, the Oakland Athletics already have a contractual right to take back that acreage to pursue the Turning Basin project. So for those reasons, like I said, staff's view is that it's not necessary and it doesn't serve the policy purpose of PUAs to do that.
I may add a little bit.
You want to add to that? Tom, can we let us hear from Eric first?
Right. So I understand your rationale, but we have no control over what Oakland and the A's do or what's in their contract, but I guess, are you telling me we cannot reserve the Turning Basin area as port priority, or there's a lot of arguments why we shouldn't do it? So is it no or is it hell no?
So Commissioner Butt, I think right at this stage of the process, I'm going to say what you said, it's hell no. And that during the permitting process, you could at that point make it a condition that not that you reserve it for port priority use, but that there be a turning basin. So I think that would be the time to deal with those projects. It would not be right now.
Okay, my second question is there a possibility that a resolution could be adopted that turns down the application but does it without prejudice, so it can be brought back at a later date?
I would assume yes, Commissioner Butt, that you could do that. You could have such a resolution. We'd have to think about it just a little bit, but I would assume so. I mean, it's a little weird with AB 1191 saying, the decision needs to be made, but a decision would be made then. I'm thinking on the fly as we talk about this. So I believe that you could do that. I do think that would be a little weird. And I will just ask Michael, do we have anything that you think, is there any reason why they couldn't bring it back that you're aware of?
I don't think so. This is a planning level action. It's not like a permit application where there are, property rights or due process considerations in that sense. Anyone could submit a Bay Plan amendment proposal to do the exact same thing as the current BPA 219. I don't see any reason why one couldn't.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions.
Commissioner Adiego, and then Commissioner Lee.
Thank you, Chair Wasserman. I'm glad that you reiterated at the end of your comments that we really are here this evening to focus on the Port PUA. We hear so many compelling arguments that speak of the need for a ballpark and that Oakland should be allowed to become its very best. And I don't think anyone in government would dispute that. But really, we're here to just look at the advisability of removing the Port PUA from Howard Terminal. And I think that Director Wan's past presentation today and his answering to queries from members of the commission were adequate for me, a compelling reason for me to be able to support the removal of the port priority use area from Howard Terminal. And I especially enjoyed Commissioner Eisen's step back in time to look back 30 years at what business and finance was like in America. We never thought we'd be where we are now. And I certainly think that this industry is probably ripe for some innovation and improvement. And I can't imagine it not happening. So I'm very confident that the Port of Oakland, its operations will survive without Howard Terminal.
Commissioner Lee.
Yes, thank you, Chair Wasserman. First, I would like to thank the BCDC staff for producing this comprehensive report, and also the East Oakland Stadium Alliance and the Port of Oakland reaching out to me to educate me about the background of this very important issue. I want to start by stating, just like everybody has said, this is not an endorsement of the Oakland Waterfront Ballpark at the Howard Terminal. This is merely the vote to allow the City of Oakland to further explore this development option and come back to BCDC for formal approval of the project at a later date if this were to pass today. Howard Terminal is a small historical berth occupying 50 acres, located at the southeastern end of the port. The equipment is very aged and the site is in dire need of additional investments. The Inner Harbor Turning Basin project by the Army Corps of Engineers, as mentioned, will remove 10 acres to allow larger container ships to make turns. With around only 40 acres left, the remaining Howard Terminal's future is very bleak as is. But the one thing Howard Terminal does have going for it is it's strategically located next to Jack London Square, which already has existing residential, retail, and mass transit resources. The expected improvement of Highway 880 connection to Adeline will significantly improve the traffic issues for the area in future port operations. Though I'm on this board representing the South Bay, I actually grew up in Berkeley and remember many fond memories visiting downtown and Oakland Chinatown. Since the pandemic, this area has been further devastated and so many small minority businesses have closed. Downtown Sacramento and more analogous over Port City, downtown Long Beach have both been revitalized with significant investment of housing small businesses. This area that we talk about today in Oakland is in much need of economic investment. And this project will both address the needs of the site to protect it from sea level rise, conducting the environmental cleanup of the estuary, as well as revitalizing the local community through increased residents and economic activity. More of our residents and children will have the opportunity to access the beautiful waterfront and the Bay Trail. Wearing my ABAG, the Association Bay Area Government hat, and having listened to many, many days of RENA appeals, the housing potential of adding 3,000 new homes, at least 450 affordable housing, is seriously impactful to help solve our Bay Area's housing crisis. The potential investment will also help rebuild the Jack London Square community, bring back more small businesses, promote equity and environmental justice. And a very important question to ask is also why other parts of the port, such as the outer harbor area, those berthed in 2226 on the north side, with deep drafts and a much longer pier with easier access by larger container ships, not inside the estuary, are not being used. It's just sitting there, and there's an utter shame. And I urge those supporting Howard Terminal's continuing operation of stevedores, longshoremen, the farmers and food providers to really work together and invest to make these deep water berths operational. And I do think that the Port of Oakland and City of Oakland would even be supportive of this as well. And for these reasons, I urge my colleagues here to vote yes to remove the port priority use area designation on the Howard Terminal so that we can further explore options to address the investment that this site so sorely needs. Thank you to everyone who came and spoke passionately about this issue today, because this shows that you really do care about the future of Oakland. And let's make this a win-win for everyone. Thank you.
Commissioner McGrath.
Thank you. This is not my first rodeo. I was hired by the Port of Oakland in 1990 to run their environmental department, and I secured entitlements for 3 different dredging projects, the new terminals that are now in use, in the inner harbor, another terminal in the outer harbor, and was instrumental in closing the Oakland Army Base in a way that divvied that property. I also spent 4 years trying to figure out how to reduce emissions from the port and started the process. The Port of Oakland was, of course, the first port that actually put their money into reducing emissions. For the last 14 years, I've been a BCDC commissioner, but this will be my last rodeo. I stayed because I have some insight as a regulator representing those who are regulated, obtaining entitlements, and specifically my involvement in the seaport planning. The thing that I want to start with is while I know something about the container business, we have to keep in mind what our metric is for evaluating these projects. And it's not economic development, which many have urged, or whether or not this is a better use. I believe that all of the port priority use area that's the subject of this matter was filled from the bay. Howard Terminal was built before my time and included, as I think we've factually determined, 17 acres of new fill under McAteer-Petrus Act for what was then an allowable use for bay fill. The staff recommendation concludes that Howard Terminal might not be needed to handle container cargo if it only grows at the moderate level and if the efficiency of the terminals increases dramatically, and if we ignore the 6% peak in August that usually occurs, and if the congestion in the rail and freeway corridors at Los Angeles and Long Beach don't shift cargo to Oakland. And in any case, it only goes through 2050. I know a little bit about time. It's been 32 years since I started at the Port of Oakland, and I saw the future of a lot of these things. This is a real estate project, one of many that I've seen in my 50-year career in the environmental business, bigger than most, but not fundamentally different from those that I saw while I was at the port. Real estate may be the most popular Oakland sport. I started after Wally Abernathy had resigned, concerned that the port's decision to invest in real estate would not be wise. And indeed, the port lost money in real estate every year I was there. There were still vacant storefronts the last time I rode my bike through Jack London Square, 32 years after I started working for the port and walked by vacant storefronts. That doesn't mean this is a bad project or necessarily a bad deal for the city of the port, but it does mean that in real estate projects, particularly in Oakland, but pretty much everywhere, there's a lot of churn and a lot of soft money that goes out. Our metric for considering this amendment is whether Howard Terminal is truly surplus, not whether a real estate project at Howard Terminal will make more money than a marine terminal. That's not our metric. That's not the rule. I am not convinced that Howard Terminal, even at 40 acres, is not a viable container terminal. While it will take capital to modernize the terminal, that's true also of much of Outer Harbor as well. There's an idea that's become common that I think is pretty misleading. The idea is that modern container terminals serve very large ships and have to be very efficient, and that's just not true. Even in Los Angeles, according to Director Gene Sirota in a comment that he made in November of 2021, and this is a direct quote, of the 86 container vessels that arrived, half were less than 5,300 TEUs in capacity. The Port of Oakland's traffic for 2021 was just under 2.5 million TEUs. In my day, the port had about 2,000 vessel calls. There may be fewer now, but the picture is still, on the average, unloading 1,000 to 2,000 TEUs per call. Both 5,300 TEU vessels and cargo volumes of 2,000 TEUs can be readily accommodated at Howard Terminal. They're still building those ships, as I think we had testimony the last time. One question that explains the current proposal is how much rent would that provide? Certainly not what's possible through this real estate deal, but that's not our metric. Next, I want to talk about the hyperbole. The Port of Oakland's not going to go away if Howard Terminal goes away. But Howard Terminal is also not the diesel death zone. It's nice to kind of focus in on what really matters. The Port of Oakland, and with lots of help from state agencies, including the Air Resources Board and the Air Pollution Control District, have dramatically reduced those emissions. But the metric that we need to use is the potential for future bay fill. Next, I want to turn to the Port of Oakland's testimony and what it means. First, I want to object to some of the personal attacks on Port Director Danny Wan. I've known Danny a while. Danny Wan was a city council member in Oakland and played a critical role in the planning and funding of the Lake Merritt improvements, which we can all see now. I wish I had a council member like Danny Wan in every bayfront city. But that doesn't mean that I find his testimony persuasive in all respects. His fiduciary responsibility is to the Port of Oakland, and we need to view his testimony through that lens. Testimony by the Port, in particular that by Christy McKinney at the hearing, made it clear that the Port hopes to see this project galvanize support for federal and state funding of transportation improvements, like rebuilding the Adeline overpass and the 7th Street underpass. Those projects would indeed make the Port more efficient, and federal funding would save the Port lots of money and make it available for investment in other capital investments. If I were in Danny's shoes, I might support this project too. It's clear to me that for the Port at this time, Howard Terminal's a chit for a different kind of economic benefit, but that's not our metric. Danny Wan, and this was mentioned again today, Danny Wan made a pretty persuasive argument that even if it were to be needed, Howard Terminal would not be needed until about 2050, maybe later, maybe earlier, and would only represent 2 years of cargo growth, so it would not prevent future fill. That one had me going for a while. I thought long and hard about this argument, and it's true that at 4,700 TEUs per acre and 40 acres, Howard Terminal represents about 2 years of cargo increases. But that's not the right metric. If Howard Terminal is eventually needed, I believe it will be, then it reduces the amount of future bay fill by 40 acres, assuming the turning basin is eventually widened. That, my fellow commissioners, is the metric that we are charged to use, and that is the reason we have an oversight role over local government decisions. Next, environmental justice. I disagree with the arguments that have been made that we can consider a change in the Port priority use because of concerns over environmental justice. There are two problems with this argument. First, the logical endpoint is that we could fill the bay to reduce environmental impacts on an EJ community. I don't see that authority. Second, even if we thought we had that authority, where we were willing to take a chance, we don't have a record that would support such a decision. If Howard Terminal is in fact needed, the ship calls, the cargo handling equipment, the trucks serving that traffic would mostly take place in Outer Harbor, immediately upwind of West Oakland. That was the community I worked with for 4 years. I've worked on health risk assessments for diesel emissions, and I know the Port worked with the Air District to produce such an assessment. We don't have that assessment making this comparison. We do have testimony by Mike Jacobs, where he cited the city EIR, arguing that the proposed use of Howard Terminal as part of a real estate development would increase, not decrease, emissions. It may not be relevant, but it is reasonably foreseeable. I don't have to agree with his argument to know that this is a more complicated question than it has been generally posed for us. I see no clear record that would allow us to conclude that terminating the Port priority use at Howard Terminal would in fact reduce emissions rather than simply shift those emissions to another area upwind of a different environmental justice community. Finally, I'm going to skip over public access. Well, I'm not going to entirely. When I started at the Port of Oakland, you couldn't get around the port on a bicycle. I've been up the Bay Bridge, down through all of the Port of Oakland, out to Middle Harbor Shoreline Park, which I had a role in, and through the area. The Bay Trail is through, and once you get to Jack London Square, you can stay on the Bay Trail all the way to San Andrew. I've bicycled every inch of that. This will be an addition to it, but only a minor one. And most of the port, which is a working port, will remain accessible only on the Bay Trail. Let's not oversell that. Finally, developing a baseball stadium on land that was filled for water-dependent uses under a BCDC permit seems to be an impossible stretch of the McAteer-Petras Act. The real estate project that is behind this proposal would leave 17 acres of bay fill in place. That fill could never have been allowed for a baseball stadium. It was to be allowed for a working seaport terminal. BCDC's program is now over 50 years old. This is not the only area where times have changed since the original permitted fill was allowed. Allowing that fill then to be used for a new non-water dependent use rather than removed would be a terrible precedent that will be seen by other local governments and landowners. That and the fact that while it may only represent 2 years of growth, this represents the potential to save 40 acres of bay fill convince me that I cannot vote for this.
Commissioner Joya.
Thank you. Let me first start. I know Commissioner McGrath talked about his resume and background, but I think, let me be clear, everybody here at this dais, from federal, state, or local government, brings their own set of experiences that's valuable to this decision. And it's not the first rodeo for a lot of other people here too, including myself, that's been on this commission for 24 years, and that's dealt with environmental justice issues and environmental issues and business issues and labor issues and port issues. So I think we all bring something to the table. I think it's important to recognize that, Jim. And I appreciate all of your work with the port, but this is a broad issue. It's significant. And so I want to start by just appreciating all of the immense work of the staff, of everybody who participated on all sides of this issue. You all, I think, have articulated important points, and I respect them all. And our nearly 1,500 comments shows, you know, the real interest in this issue. And I also want to thank the work of the Seaport Advisory Committee, the Port of Oakland, and all those who've been involved. So the decision before us today doesn't make this project happen, but it could stop the project. And I want to make an analogy for a second to baseball, since obviously there's a baseball flavor around this. You know, I think the approval of the EIR by Oakland is what brought this project to first base. I want to make the analogy of running the bases here. So the approval of the EIR brought this project to first base. If the commission votes today to remove Howard Terminal from port priority, it would move the project to second base. If it does not, I think it's like throwing the runner out from first to second, game over at that point. But ultimately, the approval of the Oakland City Council for this project and all the many issues they have to consider, which go beyond our analysis, is what would bring this project to third base. And then ultimately, a final permit by this commission is what would bring this project home. So that's how I sort of analogize the process. There's still, even if the commission voted today to change the land use, there's still approvals by Oakland and a subsequent permit here, not unlike the permit that BCDC issued over 20 years ago for the Giant Stadium. I think Supervisor Wagon Connect and I are the last two commissioners left. Oh, Larry, you were on the commission then. Of course, now you're executive director, but you were on the commission at the time when BCDC voted to issue the permit for the Giant Stadium. So, just in looking at the merits of what's before us, right? We're not evaluating the merits of the ballpark or the housing proposal. You know, however you feel about the owners, about housing, about whether the A should stay here or not, that's not within our jurisdiction today, right? We are really evaluating whether removing Howard Terminal from port priority takes away from our region's capability to meet the projected growth in cargo, and whether the cargo forecast can be met with existing terminals. That's our review. That's our responsibility. And the staff, after a lot of diligent work, working with the Port of Oakland, working with stakeholders, working with other experts in the field, has concluded that removing the 57 acres of Howard Terminal from port priority would not detract from the Bay Area's capability to meet the projected cargo growth, and concludes that the cargo forecast can be met with existing terminals, addressing container, dry bulk, and the auto roll-on, roll-off chips. And yes, no projection is perfect. I mean, I've been in local government for 34 years. I cannot recall a time when we have 100% certainty of a decision based on information. It's sort of, the analysis is always based on the best available objective information at that time. So sure, we can always say, are we 100% certain? No. You tell me if you've ever made, maybe a few, right? Usually not based on data, but decisions that are 100% certain. We're called on to make a decision at this time and place based on the information that's provided, and staff has made that conclusion. I'm confident that if they felt they could not, that would have been their recommendation, that no, we cannot meet projected cargo growth. You know, so what's the impact for me, the influence for me on the Seaport Advisory Committee recommendation? Well, it was a 5-4 vote, 5-4 to 1, based on an earlier staff analysis with old information. So a 1 vote difference based on old information. That's not persuasive to me. How many of you make decisions based upon a recommendation that was a 1 vote difference based on old information that has since been updated to us? And the staff has reached a conclusion based on that updated information that the port priority use should change. So I wanted to address that because folks have thrown around the Seaport Advisory Committee. Again, I appreciate their work. They made their recommendation on a 5-4 to 1 vote based on the information that was presented that's since been updated. One of the factors we briefly talked about, in addition to the belief that we have enough port land available for future growth, I'm not convinced that efficiencies and new technologies that would continue to allow each acre of port land to be used more efficiently has not been factored into the analysis. I served on the California Air Resources Board for 7 years. I serve on the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. I understand the regulations and requirements being placed on ports, put a number of them on ports myself through my own votes. And we are going to continue to see more efficient use of port land, and we're seeing that occur in other countries, and we're going to see more of that occur here in the United States and in Oakland. And I'm confident that the needs will continue to be met because of that. So with regard to the Turning Basin project, I think that was pointed out in some of the staff responses. So the Howard Terminal, based on the information provided to us, is not technically needed for the Turning Basin project, but we can get a chance to address that issue further during any permit proceedings should they occur before this commission in the future and address that issue. As to the current uses at Howard Terminal, those can be relocated, I think what was mentioned, to backlands at the port without detracting from meeting cargo growth, because those are not water dependent. Remember, our concern is we want to save water dependent port land so we don't have to fill the bay in the future. But those uses could be moved to other areas and don't jeopardize that. So I'm convinced that the staff's hard work and analysis has created the record for us to be able to make a conclusion that Howard Terminal can be removed. The 56 acres of Howard Terminal can be removed from port priority. What happens next is not up to us, it's up to others, and it may come back here for future determination if it goes that far.
Thank you. Commissioner Eklund.
Thank you very much. Let me move my hand here. There we go. I'm struggling, and I would like to ask the commissioners and or the staff. I'm not sure exactly who to ask here. I've been struggling with this issue when I attended or watched the Seaport committee discussing this issue. I was convinced that they made the right decision, and was surprised actually that in the 11th and a half hour, a vote was changed, which I'm not even sure was appropriate or not. But anyway, a vote was changed. So I have been struggling with this. I've read the cargo forecast and the updates that we got from staff. And I understand that the forecasts are sort of like a crystal ball, because no one knows what's going to happen by 2050. Who knew that we were going to get COVID and it was going to change our life and change everything that we've been working towards for a long time. I'm working for EVA for 35 years. We kept saying, oh yeah, let's all take buses and reduce the use of cars. Well, now public transit is struggling to even stay alive, because most people are telecommuting. And who would have projected that 10 years ago or even 5 years ago? So it's really that really has fundamentally changed, I think, the way we work. I guess the concern I have is that it would make me feel a lot more comfortable if we were, as part of the Seaport plan coming up, if part of that would include looking at whether a port priority use designation closer to the outer harbor would help reserve that additional acreage for future water-oriented marine activity. And I guess I wanted to ask staff, is that possible to include an evaluation as to whether or not we should designate some additional port priority use, some additional acreage for that port priority use designation? Is that part of the Seaport planning process?
The Seaport planning process does involve the ports requesting some minor changes or changes to priority use areas, and they have to go through the same kind of justification process that the applicant had to go through for BPA 219. And so we haven't had, as far as I know, any requests from the Port of Oakland to add any priority use area or anything like that, like you alluded to before. But we could certainly look into that and discuss it with them. But our recommendation is that that Howard Terminal port priority use area could be removed without detracting from the regional capability to meet the growth in cargo. So I don't know if it's necessary, but we could certainly look into it.
So the only reason we would look at, excuse me?
Go ahead.
So can we only look at a port priority use designation that's initiated by the port, and we can't initiate it?
Not necessarily, I don't think. I don't know if legal wants to chime in on that, but we could look into that too, or propose changes. We would want to work with the port.
Your chair is going to jump into that one, Eric.
Yeah.
Your chair is going to jump into that one. I'm sure the normal process would be for an applicant to propose such a thing. On the other hand, it's been made clear in these discussions that we have a regional responsibility. And we have a regional responsibility precisely because localities might make decisions that don't take regional priorities into account. So we are, as we've been told, undertaking the revision, or at least looking at amending the Seaport plan to bring it up to date in a general way. I would suggest that we can initiate looking at additional areas as part of our regional responsibility.
Well, that would make me feel a lot more comfortable with recognizing that Howard Terminal may not be the best place for, because it doesn't have a deep water. Whereas out at the outer harbor, you do have deeper water. So with that understanding, I can see staff's recommendation. I did want to compliment, though, Commissioner McGrath for his really well thought out comments, and I agree with many of them. And I share Mayor Butt's concern about the turning basin. And in fact, I had the same question he had as to whether or not we could take it. But I agree that as part of if the permit application is submitted, that's the time to do it. So I'm going to support staff's recommendation with the understanding that we're going to be able to have some discussion about whether there's other property closer to the outer harbor that may, for the regional need, may be more important for port priority use designation. So, and again, I want to compliment staff. This is not an easy issue, and want to thank all the staff and the leaders of BCDC for all their efforts.
Commissioner Al-Tawansi.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start off by thanking the staff at BCDC for all the detailed research and the transparency during this arduous process to allow the Commission to consider amending the San Francisco Bay Plan and Seaport Plan for the redesignation of the Howard Terminal as a port priority use area at the Port of Oakland. I also want to thank our fellow commissioners as well as the public for your thoughtful insights and considerate comments. No doubt this is an extremely difficult decision given the numerous concerns and opportunities put forth during this amendment process. While the department recognizes that there is no easy solution in this situation, we are committed to working with our partners and participating in the BCDC discretionary permitting process if Bay Plan Amendment 2-19 is approved, particularly regarding issues around truck parking and railroad crossing safety. That being said, and based on the BCDC staff recommendation that under the moderate growth scenario, the region's capability to meet projected cargo growth can be met with existing terminals in conjunction with the updated cargo figures at the Port of Benicia. The department supports the staff recommendation to approve the amendment to remove the Howard Terminal as a port priority use area in the Seaport Plan, with the understanding that issues and impacts associated with truck parking and circulation, as well as pedestrian and bicyclist safety in and around adjacent railroads within the project area are properly mitigated. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner On.
Thank you, Chair Wasserman. So on the level, this is a closer question because maybe just to emphasize generally for the public, I don't believe the community benefits yet are a done deal. I listened to public comment very carefully. I really did appreciate the commitment of many speakers to things like environmental remediation, public access, investment in local businesses, as well as jobs, including local and targeted hire. This has all been part of my own career as a nonprofit environmental justice lawyer for over a decade at this point. And I really believe in these concepts. And of course, as you've heard from many other commissioners, this isn't explicitly part of our consideration today. But I do want to emphasize something that I expressed in the last commission hearing as well, that I believe environmental justice more generally should be a part of every action of BCDC. And I really do hope this commission continues to adhere to that and that these comments that you expressed today will be especially important if we do move forward with removing the PUA designation and evaluating this as part of the permit application. So pausing there for a moment, I'll say that the threshold for evaluating environmental justice today for this particular policy action that BCDC, for me at least, is a relatively lower threshold than it normally would be for a permit application, in the sense that I want to make sure as a commissioner, at least, that environmental injustices aren't occurring when we do this. And so there were really two things I looked at closely. One was the idea of relocation of ancillary uses. So to that end, I appreciated Commissioner Nelson's questions to that effect. And of course, I looked closely at the staff reports, which talked about how existing land use restrictions prevent negative impacts increasing as a result of moving forward by removing the PUA designation. So there's that component. And the second is really the idea of opportunity, that we can create an opportunity to have public access, to have public use of the waterfront in a way that we normally wouldn't have by removing this designation. So on another level, this is an easier vote for me as a commissioner because the policy and legal questions for me are relatively narrow. And I ultimately agree with the staff recommendation that the removal does not detract from the region's capacity to meet the cargo forecast and can be met with our existing terminals. So as long as environmental injustices aren't immediately apparent with the removal of this designation, I feel comfortable moving forward and will be voting yes accordingly on the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. I have found this a really difficult process. I talked earlier about 1191, AB 1191, I won't again. And I think the call here is a close one. I started leaning no, but over the course of the last couple of months, we've gotten a lot of additional information. It's now clear, just to go over a few of those. We have much more clarity about row forecasts. Staff talked about that there earlier. Commissioner Ahn just spoke about environmental justice concerns. I was very skeptical early on about the growth forecast, the moderate growth forecast. I think that's reasonable. Is it good? As Commissioner Joya said, it's going to prove to be right. We don't know, but it's a responsible, reasonable forecast. Efficiency is another issue Commissioner Joya spoke about. I wanted to talk about that for a moment. We want to drive efficiency in order to make sure that we hit these forecasts. We've tended to focus on cargo. Efficiency is just as important. We need to drive that efficiency. It may not be easy to get that efficiency, but at the same time, filling 100 acres of bay because you can't hit efficiency targets is going to be extraordinarily difficult. And I hope that difficulty helps drive that efficiency. It's equally important to the cargo forecasts. Turning basin, we've spoken about, and I am comfortable moving forward. I am a yes vote. I'm supporting the staff. I have two comments beyond that. The first is a comment about the turning circle, the turning basin. If there was information in the record and if we had the authority to maintain jurisdiction over those port priority use designation over those 10 acres, I'd be willing to move that, but I don't think we can do that. I don't think it would be a legal authority of the record. But I just want to make a comment there. It may be tempting to look at those 10 acres and think of that as additional developable land. The port and VAs potentially, if we see a permit application there, have to come back and make a case regarding maximum feasible public access. That's going to be difficult to make if that maximum feasible public access is sitting on land that may be lost to a turning basin in the future. So I just wanted to flag that as an issue. And staff said that as a contractual matter, that could be worked out between the port and the applicant and the A's. And I just wanted to urge staff to stay in touch with that process to make sure that that in fact is worked out. So that the commitment that Danny Wan made, I'm sure in complete good faith to us today, is honored in any application we see before us down the road. I did want to thank Commissioner McGrath for his comment about the fill issues. We haven't been discussing that issue. A substantial amount of the Howard Terminal is on fill. I don't believe that a ballpark is an approvable use for that fill. We've dealt with those issues for a long time on the San Francisco waterfront with regard to what uses are allowable on fill. And I just wanted to say that this is not a new issue for us. It's also not an issue that is before us today. It's an issue we're going to need to wrestle with when and if an application comes before us. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Moulton Peters.
Thank you, Chair. Whoops, I just disappeared. Okay, here I am. So I want to also thank our staff and all the public comment, and I want to thank my fellow commissioners for their thoughtful comments as well. There's lots that we've considered and lots that's outside this decision, so I'm going to confine my comments to the decision at hand. You know, as I did my size up of Howard Terminal, it was it's a property that's long been part of the Port of Oakland, developed in World War II or probably before, at a time when there were a lot smaller ships and smaller operations there. You know, the waterway in that area is narrowly constrained compared to the outer port. The road network is similarly narrowly constrained. Former Oakland Mayor Gene Kwan reminds us that 400 acres to the west were added to the port by the Army, and that the major development of the port has taken place on that acreage since that time. The port has said they would not be making capital improvements in the inner port area, specifically Howard Terminal, and that they would confine major capital improvements to the outer area. So I think that it says a lot about where the port sees the future going. The port CEO, McKinley, said that the road network around Howard Terminal is inadequate to serve high volume cargo needs. So to me, it's an ancillary use property, and there's a reason for that. We've had information and testimony that indicates that there is other property elsewhere in the port for ancillary uses. We've had quite a bit of study presented to us. It was updated, the cargo forecast, during this process, and it's unfortunate that the SPAC didn't get another chance to review it, but it is what it is. And so, you know, I'm satisfied that the staff has shown us that there is adequate capacity under the moderate growth scenario. And yes, it does only go to 2050, and it's difficult, if not impossible, to look beyond that time period with any certainty. You know, what we do know, as I said, is there are parcels for ancillary uses. And we also do know, and I agree with Commissioner Gioia, that efficiency is a must. We need to use our lands more efficiency for agriculture, for housing, for port use, for everything. And so this will happen, and it is happening other places. I want to just comment briefly on the concept of ever-increasing import and export business. You know, I'm a little surprised that there was no mention made of some of manufacturing returning to the United States, that outsourcing during COVID was certainly an issue for essential products. It's certainly been an issue in terms of job loss in California and other parts of the country. So for me, as we try and look in our crystal ball, I would say that there may be some trending that some manufacturing comes back to the U.S. and reduces some of the need for cargo capacity. Anyway, the jobs we do have in Oakland are jobs we want to keep. I don't think those jobs are going away, and the ancillary uses are not going away. They just may move around. And then finally, the turning basin project. Look, this is a operational issue that it's in the port's best interest to address this for their business. So I don't have any reason to believe they're not going to address this, or they wouldn't address this if we need some additional confirmation for some that this will actually happen, then let's put that in place in the permitting process. But I don't see how the port goes into the future without the turning basis. So then, getting back to the decision at hand, I am satisfied that the staff has done its due diligence looking at the cargo forecasting, and that the studies and the testimony we received adequately make the case. And so I'm going to support the recommendation to remove the Howard Terminal from port priority use. And I will be voting yes on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gorin.
I really want to thank all of my colleagues for their thoughtful comments and questions. Especially, I always pay attention to Commissioner McGrath and Barry Nelson. Thank you so much for your great expertise and lending to this discussion. And great staff work as well. I raised the discussion about the turning basin because I did not want this decision to preclude that investment going forward. And I'm comfortable with the discussion that will be handled when if we receive an application coming forward, and when that will be, I'm not sure. But we also have an opportunity in looking at removing 10 acres of fill to expand the turning basin. And I really picked up on Commissioner McGrath's concern about, and echoed by a couple of the other commissioners, about the amount of fill that was added for the construction of Howard Terminal, or to expand to Howard Terminal. And so I see this as an opportunity to really look at what we can do as commissioners, as BCDC, to minimize and perhaps decrease the amount of fill in this area for a number of reasons. I think it's important. I also think I really want to thank all of the members of the community for their passionate communication and letting us know, me know as a Sonoma Valley resident, of the importance of the function of Howard Terminal, the jobs employed still at Howard Terminal, and the opportunities not necessarily related to a stadium, but open space and access. And that is what we have focused on as a commission time and time again in each of the deliberations of our projects, is trying to create public access, open up the bay to many folks in the community who are denied that public access. So I appreciated that perspective. I'm going to support the staff recommendation, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness behind all of that and answering our questions very patiently and moving forward. And want to echo some of the commissioners' comments about our lives have changed in a split second with COVID. We are on Zoom. Who knew about Zoom 2.5 years ago? And yet we are participating. How our lives have changed with the internet. Yeah, sometimes not for the best, but certainly for lots of reasons. I think technology and opportunity and economic opportunity will drive many decisions in the future to create a far more sustainable and resilient port operation. And like Commissioner Joya, I served on the Air Quality Management District and Commissioner Wagon Connect when we really pushed forward on the necessity of electrifying the port to reduce some of those emissions. I think we can use those mechanisms in the future to create even better conditions for the residents, for the businesses, and the port operations. And I look forward to having those great projects and coming forward and getting us to a place of much better operations in the future. For a while, I was joking that my new appliances were sitting in a container in the port of Oakland because it took me 1.5 years to get them, but they did arrive. So apparently they've been unloaded. So thanks all. and I appreciate your patience and great comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wagon Connect.
Thank you. It's been fun to get to hear some folks. All I've known of you is a 2-inch square, and it's nice to hear some of your thought processes. I'm not always in agreement with Commissioner Joya, but I thought he was pretty right on in his reasoning today. I thought there was great staff work. I think that we do not have 100% guarantee, but we do have a very strong recommendation. And I look forward to a dynamic future with efficiency and technology. So I will be voting yes on this project. this question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mendonça.
I will be relatively brief since I am new to this specific conversation, but I obviously had a chance to review all the materials and a chance to listen to the conversations today. And I do appreciate the quality of the staff work that was done going into this. I just want to make one comment about projections, and particularly projections in the future in uncertain times, since that's a lot of what I did in my prior life as a management consultant. And part of the way you deal with that is to create scenarios and put some sense of likelihood against those scenarios, and what are they dependent on, and what are the interdependencies and things that could influence what you might do in different scenarios. And I was pleased to see that the scenarios going forward to me look like reasonable projections with reasonable ranges. If we had come forward with a base recommendation, which was substantial growth with no productivity improvement or low productivity improvement, I would have been extremely skeptical. The growth of volume is not dependent on what we'd like to have happen. It's dependent on global competitiveness. And if you are growing in volume and not increasing your productivity, you're going to be cost uncompetitive. So to the extent there is substantial growth going forward, I would assume what that will do is put even more pressure on ensuring that we are cost competitive. And this is a very competitive global industry. So I want to compliment the staff's projections and their thinking about how those things interplay, and the fact that a reasonable assumption about growth and a reasonable assumption about productivity are a good base case. And I'm also comfortable that if those were on upper bounds of those, that there are other levers that can be done to help improve our ability to compete that don't include using the land at our terminal as part of a contingency to make that happen. So I am in support of the staff recommendation.
Commissioner Pine.
Thank you. I too wanted to thank the staff for their incredible hard work and quality work on this matter, and for the really helpful input we've received from all the stakeholders. Certainly learned more about ports than I ever thought I would. So I do believe the Turning Basin project will go forward. So after the Howard Terminal site is reduced in size to accommodate the Turning Basin, the question becomes, is 40 acres needed to accommodate projected regional growth in cargo? And to me, 40 acres is an extremely small sliver of the regional port acreage across our 5 ports. I am persuaded by the thorough staff report that this 40 acres will not jeopardize the region's ability to meet its future cargo needs. I don't believe that removing Howard Terminal from the PUA designation will jeopardize the Port of Oakland. As I understand it, the port has over 1,300 acres. I think it can still thrive if Howard Terminal is put to a different use. So for these reasons, I'll favor the staff report.
Thank you. Commissioner Klein.
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who spoke today and all the letters and emails that this commission has received. Thanks to staff for their reports and helping me kind of come up to speed on the previous materials and discussions that this commission is undertaken. And a special thanks to the insightful comments and perspectives of my fellow commissioners who've looked at these issues a lot longer than I have in a lot more detail. So thank you for that. Today, we are not looking at approving the Ballpark project. The staff report in my mind was very clear. The removal of the port priority use designation does not preclude continued use of the Howard Terminal for support, nor the CEQA lead agency for the Ballpark project ultimately it does not commit the authorization of the Ballpark project. So to me, that's the critical thing. We all want Oakland to thrive, and the Port of Oakland will go away. Jack London Square will still be, no matter what happens, these 40 acres. And so after Howard Terminal,
Larry, you might try turning your camera off. You're getting a little frozen and broken up.
Yep.
Normally I don't say that.
Thank you. Yep. And for me, the Inner Harbor I know there are issues, the inner harbor turning basin is still critical and needs to be implemented. There are conceivable potential future sites that need to be evaluated. But and so on that point, what I was talking about earlier, I really look forward to a comprehensive update to the Seaport plan, which I think will be critical to this commission's future decisions. But from my standpoint, based upon our current growth forecasts, I am in full support of staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Commissioner Eckerly.
Thank you. I will keep it brief as I realize I put my hand up at the last minute here. I just wanted to first thank the staff for their incredible work on this effort over many, many months. And also to all of the thoughtful and impassioned people who showed up today and provided letters on both sides, sharing your feedback and your insights with us, and to my fellow commissioners for your thoughtful comments and perspective. I am here to share that I'm going to support the staff recommendation. I feel very comfortable that given the information we have at hand and knowing we do not have a crystal ball and we need to use the best available data we have before us to understand where we think we're going to go in the future, I feel comfortable that removing the port priority use area will not deter from the ongoing regional needs of the Bay to support port use. And then I appreciate Commissioner McGrath's comments about the concerns around fill, and I reiterate some of the comments from my other fellow commissioners that is not a consideration before us here today, and that we will have, if a permit application comes before us in the future, a robust discussion and a very high standard of comprehensive review of the breadth of considerations in our Bay Plan policies and the McAteer-Petras Act to consider all of those issues. So thanks again for everyone's hard work. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Commissioner Showalter.
Yes, this is a subject that I have known very little about. I learned more about cargo in the last 6 months than in my entire life. And I'd like to thank the staff and all the consultants for, providing the information that we needed. I also would just like to say that it's kind of been a pleasure to be doing something where our ex parte communications were quite different. We were free to go and meet with the proponents and the opponents, and there wasn't really a problem with that. So that was an excellent opportunity for me to learn about the situation. I too was really struck by how important the turning basin is. So as we go forward, I think that we'll have to make sure that we do everything that we can to support that. I am in support of the staff recommendation. It seems like we don't have any guarantees in this life. You never know for sure how things are going to turn out. But this seems to me like a reasonable bet. So I'm happy to support the staff recommendation, and thank you so much for all the good work.
I don't see any other hands from commissioners. I want to make just a few brief remarks. As Commissioner Joya said, for all of us, this is not our first rodeo. I, in addition to being chair of this commission for the past 10 years, not 11, oh, sorry, louder, last 10 years, I did serve on the Oakland Port Commission for 3.5 years a while ago, and in fact helped to create the department that Mr. McGrath headed. So I have some sense of the port. I also agree with Commissioner Joya and remarks by a number of others that there's no way we can predict what changes are going to occur in improvements that will affect maritime transportation and cargo and the port. But 2007, iPhone was introduced. You want to talk about things that have revolutionized our life and the way we live. Not always for the better, but nonetheless. The Port of Oakland was the first port on the West Coast and one of the first, I believe, in the world to introduce cargo cranes and really go to containers. I don't know whether Executive Director Juan has the vision or courage of Ben Nutter, who was the executive director who led that effort. But I have hopes. And we know there will be changes. So I think that clearly supports the staff recommendation and the decision. I want to talk about just a couple of other items. I appreciate Commissioner McGrath in many ways. Obviously, I disagree with him on this particular issue. And I take particular disagreement that by taking Howard out of the port priority use designation, and if there's greater need, that automatically means there's going to be 40 acres of fill, because again, we don't know what the changes are going to be. So I think that's sort of a false metric, or at least answering it. But the basic metric we're using, he was correct, and I think the staff report addresses, and I think the remarks of the commissioners here address. I am also very persuaded by the comments made by Executive Director Juan and his deputy, Christy McKenna. Howard Terminal is not economically viable as a container operation. Is it viable for ancillary uses? Obviously it is. Is that where ancillary uses should be? Probably not. Are there other places for ancillary uses? Yes, and I think that the port has fully answered that issue. I certainly agree with the comments of many of the commissioners about the importance of the turning circle, but the port knows that. We don't have to tell them that. And that's the last point I want to make. And it sort of has to do with what the burden here, what the standard is. I think for us to reach a decision that is different than the Port of Oakland, who's in the business of maritime. They operate the airport. They operate real estate. But maritime is the core business of the Port of Oakland. And yes, we've got a regional responsibility. But for us to put our judgment above theirs, to me, would require a very strong showing that the projections they're talking about for need and their comments on Howard and the projections made by our staff and consultants would be a very hard burden to meet. So I will join in supporting the motion. I would ask Corey to present the staff recommendations, and I certainly want to join the chorus of supporting the staff, Corey, and all of the staff who work very, very hard on this. Not always made easy by the Port of Oakland. I just want to note. They really did yeoman work on this, and I thank that. So, Corey, please make the staff recommendation.
Sure, I will share my screen just a second. And the motion is up on this slide. Not sure if it's helpful for me to read or if a commissioner should read this.
Oh, you go ahead, Corey.
Okay, so it's the motion to approve BPA 219. And it reads that the staff recommends that the commission adopt the attached resolution, number 2022-02, or Appendix A, that would, number 1, amend the San Francisco Bay Plan, maps 4 and 5, as well as Table 5, Table 10, Table 11, and Figure 4 of the Seaport Plan by removing the Port Priority Use Area designation from 56 acres of Port Priority Use Area at Howard Terminal at the Port of Oakland. Number 2, amend resolution number 16 as described in the resolution 16 section of this report being the final recommendation. Number 3, make necessary findings regarding environmental impacts outlined in the environmental assessment, incorporating the errata corrections that was on slide 23 today. And number 4, make necessary findings that the Bay Plan Amendment conforms to all applicable findings and declarations of policies of the McAteer-Petras Act.